Monday, April 20th, 2020, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So the economic collapse worldwide continues. Crude oil has hit a 20-year low below $15 overnight. That's the front month May crude. Before I look at crude oil and why it's so important and the markets, let's quickly look at some of the headlines that I think are important. One of them is about Italian government bonds. It looks like the yields there are starting to go back up, and that's not a good sign. We know from the 2012 sovereign debt crisis in Europe that every country in Europe and around the world owe each other hundreds of billions of dollars. So if one of them goes, all the other ones will go, and the banks as well, of course. They have heavily lent to the sovereign countries. So as you can see here, the 10-year yield in Italy is up almost 7 basis points, almost back up to 2%. It's at around 186. And yes, the Italian yield curve is negative up to a year, but it used to be negative up to about, I think, 5 or 7 years at a certain point. So this is something we need to keep an eye on. What's Zero Hedge saying? Well, it says China outraged after latest German newspaper accuses Beijing of exporting. This crisis, of course, demands 149 billion in damages. That's what I wanted to talk about a little bit. Partly is that the animosity towards China, and I'm not defending China, I'm just looking at the fact China being the biggest creditor nation in the world doesn't bode very well. China has loads of investments, not only in the US, but in Europe as well. So we need to keep that in mind. So now let's go look at the markets, and I'll incorporate looking at the markets to look at crude oil and how important crude oil has become for the financial markets, for the banking sector, which is not historically what has always happened. I remember years ago in the 80s, in the 90s, lower oil prices were good for the markets, were good for the bond markets, for the stock market. It meant that prices could be kept under control. But nowadays, Wall Street, the banking sector, they've pumped so much easy credit, free money, so to speak, the last 10, 11 years into the oil industry that a collapsing energy market could trigger a lot of troubles in the financial market on Wall Street, City of London. And that's why it's so important now. So it's fairly early this morning, 7:30 a.m. London. So gold and silver are not doing much overnight. If anything, gold traded a little lower overnight. As I said, it's the one thing that you need to keep a hold of. Outside the system, of course, precious metals in physical form. This is not the time to trade anything, in my opinion. So right now, we've got spot gold at 1681. It's down about $2. The low has been 1669 and the high 1689. Silver has actually remained quite steady. It's up about 3 cents at 15.18. The low has been 14.98 and the high 15.34. The stock market, you'd think, would have dropped a lot more, but it hasn't. It has traded down to just above 24,000. Right now it's at 24,142. The Dow futures, that is, it's down about 100 points or 0.4%. S&P, the same. It's down about 0.4 at 2863. NASDAQ 100 future is at 87.87, down about 40. Currencies. Sterling is down 1/3%. at 124.58. The euro is down 0.2% at 108.52. And the dollar is up about a third versus the Japanese yen at 107.85. So now to crude oil. Yeah, this is not a good sign that crude is continuing to go lower, traded below 15 overnight. I'll show you here the crude oil futures quotes from Globex on the CME group. You can see that crude got down to 14.47. That's the May contract. Of course, there's a big contango because of the storage fees with the June contract. June's still above 20, of course. It got down to 22.71. But the one we need to look at is the May. As you can see there, we got below $15. So FT is saying U.S. oil prices plunged to 20-year low as the crisis hits demand. So I'm not going to go through this article because there's not much to add from what I've said already. So right now we've got the June contract, which I have live quotes for, at 23.80, down about 3.3%. The low's been 22.71. So yeah, so much for that deal between the Saudis and the Russians. There's not much, you see, intervention or manipulation can do once a trend is lower or higher in any market. The market always trumps governments and manipulators. And that's why, in my opinion, we're not out of the woods yet in the stock market. The Fed can throw as much as it wants at it. It's not going to stick. And nor with gold, as physical demand continues for gold from the public. The public is not into gold yet. Believe me, it's just a few people like us, a few people who know what's going on. But you don't see people queuing up for gold at jewelry stores or bullion dealers. I don't see that. I know it's hard right now because the shops are closed. But yeah, the supply of gold is drying up. Yes, 99.9% of all the gold ever mined is still above ground and is not consumed. But when there's fear in the system, the people who have gold will not let go of it, and that's why the supply shrinks. There's nothing on offer. There's no offer. There's only bids, and that will drive the price higher eventually. And the bullion banks, in my opinion, are just trying to run for the hills right now, covering their paper short positions. It's not going to last very long. So I'm not concerned about the price of gold nor silver. Silver, of course, has a much bigger potential. So yeah, a lot of signals are not pointing to any kind of recovery. I think if we went off a lockdown at the end of April, for example, beginning of May, and allowed the economies to, and the powers that be, of course, allowed the economies to come back, it wouldn't. And we know that they keep extending these lockdowns. There's always an excuse. I think it's going to be a lot longer. And that's why I think the economies are going to continue to implode. We're going to see the oil price continue to go even lower, I would say. The next target would be $10. The bond market as well. In the US, that's pointing to more weakness as well. We've got the 10-year yield right now at 0.63%, down about 3 basis points. Someone asked me yesterday during the live stream what I thought about the economies, what would be my guess for the next month or so. And I said that I expect it to get even worse, unfortunately, that the expectations in terms of the economic data by Wall Street and the major economists, City of London, their expectations are still too high. And that's why I think the markets are not out of the woods. I know the central banks are trying to patch everything up. They've got all these programs, but in the real world, it's very hard to implement them. And I think May and June are going to be pretty horrific, I think, in terms of bankruptcies, mortgage failures, and everything else. So not just in the US, but in the UK, all around the world, things are going to get worse. And especially if we're not out of lockdown yet. And I think that the damage has been done. Even if we were to come back in a month or two, it's not going to be that simple. A lot of people are going to be out of work. I also saw yesterday a story, and someone mentioned it in the live stream. Some of the big meat markets in the US are starting to close down, and that's not good in terms of food prices. So we need to keep an eye on all those things and try to adapt and be nimble. Just before I finish, I wanted to let you know that Billy and I designed a new mug and new t-shirts, and it's entitled "Don't Tread on Billy, Freedom and Sound Money for the World." So there you go. If you have an interest, we've got mugs and t-shirts and sweatshirts. I've seen quite a few of those Gadsden flags in some of the protests in the States about the lockdown, and a lot of people are carrying the "Don't Tread on Me" flag, which I think is a good symbol. And I've kind of done a little bit of a bit of fun with Billy. Don't tread on Billy. We know Billy is a silver bug, so we've got a couple of silver coins there on the design. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button. Please share it far and wide. Think about subscribing to the channel if you haven't yet. And you can also follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Steemit, and DTube. I wish you all a great start to the week. Take care. Bye.